there's lots of frontline folks who certainly felt the impacts of that and still are. As an administrator, just normal 16 to 17-hour days was normal from the time that it started till when I left. And I think at that time, so at that time when I decided to leave, I was definitely burnt out. I don't think I said those words, but I was a nub. And I had to rebuild me first before I could actually get back into the work.
There are a lot of people who will relate to your description there in just not being able to take care of themselves in the midst of all of the things that they're required to take care of, whether it's their job or their family, especially in the midst of the pandemic.
Welcome to The Grit Factor, reimagining grit as part of the whole person in a life that matters. I'm your host, Shannon Huffman-Polson. This season is brought to you by Tiller, the first personal finance service to automate all your daily spending and account balances into spreadsheets, so you can track everything in one place with everything customizable, strict privacy, and no ads. Try Tiller free today at tillerhq.com. Also by the Grit Institute, providing whole leader learning journeys in grit and resilience, purpose, and storytelling. Invest in your people for long-term success. Find out more at thegritinstitute.com.
Our guest today on the Grit Factor podcast is Leigh Burgess. Leigh is an entrepreneur and a manifesting generator taking big swings of bold to solve problems for good. I wanted Leigh to come on the Grit Factor podcast because she has been where so many of us have been over the last several years. She had a very successful career in healthcare where she really felt connected to purpose, but she was overworked. She was completely burned out. And in the midst of the pandemic, she decided to make a change. And she found a way to make a change, both taking care of herself while also launching a brand new business, which in the first year and a half has been incredibly successful. She's now using her skills and gifts in innovative ways through the Bold Industries Group Incorporated, a conglomerate organization encompassing her passion for business consulting and coaching through high road strategy, as well as other interests. She's also a regular contributor to Forbes, Fast Company and Entrepreneur, and she's recently been honored as one of the 2022 Success Magazine 125 Leaders to Watch. I think you'll understand at the end of this conversation today when she shares some very personal information that she's never shared before, as well as what it is that drives her, what drives her to excel, to exceed the standard, and to take on new risks and challenges, that she's driven by tackling exactly those challenges that, when they're solved, make the world a better place. I think you'll understand that connection to purpose that we talk about so often. Take a listen.
Well, Leigh, welcome to the Grit Factor. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Well, you're coming in from a little bit of a different background than some of our other guests, but I think with some very similar challenges and opportunities and grit. So I felt like you would be a particularly good guest to talk about the way that you have been able to maneuver through some of the challenges of the health profession in a way, and the sciences in a way that others have done with jet airplanes and logistics and other things.
Yes, I'm honored to be in the company of other people that have preceded me, certainly on this podcast.
No, it's a great group. It's fantastic. Well, tell us a little bit how you got started out. And I know we're going to get to a story at Duke, which is my alma mater. Right. So I love that we can spend a little bit of time in Durham before we get up to the place of my other alma mater, where you are now. But yes, tell us a little bit about how it is that you got started in the work in the medical profession and in medical sciences.
Sure. So my undergraduate, I actually started in nursing. I felt like I, wanted to learn the science side, the clinical side of work, but had intention to be CEO of a children's hospital. That's what I wanted to be. And so I really started there and went straight into my MHA at Xavier, and really learned a lot in both places, in both spaces. Spent early career actually doing a little bit of work in healthcare and in education. I had a stint for several years actually working between the classroom and technology, where I helped make data actionable, which I think that's where my love of data and metrics and, getting stuff done with information, and knowing what information can do, and sometimes you can't do much with it if you don't have all the ingredients.
Sure.
And then we moved to North Carolina, and I actually started at Duke and started as a project manager. So I worked at Duke for almost 10 years and started as a project manager, went into different roles, and ended up as the Chief Research Operations Officer for the Duke Cancer Institute. So I oversaw.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it was a good run, a very wonderful experience, and a great place to be.
Yeah. So tell us about that role. What was that? What were the requirements of that role?
Yeah, so obviously there was some grit in that role for sure. I think resiliency, a little bit of thick skin every now and then, because my job was to not only advocate and innovate, but also make sure that we were doing things safely, ethically, and by the regulatory rules for clinical research. So I oversaw all clinical research for Duke, specifically in cancer. And so that's a very, very busy group in the sense of options. We want to have as many options for our patients as possible. So my role was really administrative as well as operational.
Wow. Now, before you even arrived there, I mean, obviously, as you started your studies and started to accrue these many degrees that you are continuing to to accrue, you already knew that you wanted to not just be in the field, but actually be running something in the field, to be the CEO of a children's hospital. How did that vision of yourself and what that future would be come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've always thought of myself as a leader. And early on, I played sports, and then actually I'm old enough where, it wasn't required to have girl sports or female sports. So like even in high school, we didn't have a girls soccer team. So
Really?
Yeah, I'm that old. But that's unheard of today, right? So I think from the particulars of, I still played soccer. I just played with boys. And so and I started playing soccer in second grade and did everything. And I think I never felt like it was any other thing that if I wanted to do it, I could do it. And I enjoyed being able to get things done and to help others also see their own gifts and their expertise. I think in high school and college and working up and even to my first roles, I think I just always like that team aspect. And I think I do better when I'm leading it versus following. Although I don't mind following a good leader, I think sometimes there's just not enough of them.
That's for sure. No, that's certainly the case. Well, sports comes into the stories of many, many leaders, it turns out.
Yeah.
Certainly in the Grit Factor, I think, though, the statistics are pretty clear that in terms of women leaders, women CEOs, that sports are, the vast majority of them were involved in sports in a competitive way at some point in their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was great. Yeah. So soccer and fast pitch softball. So we didn't even have a junior team. It was a senior team. And in my ninth grade year, I went out for the varsity team and made it. And I was just so elated. And so was able to do some of those things. I think that gave me a lot of confidence, obviously helped me meet people, different people in the high school and be able to meet different people in different grades and those types of things. So I think gave me confidence to do things that I think maybe others couldn't. Just trying something new totally. And what I call a big swing of bold, that was literally and figuratively one for sure.
That's great. Well, so now you're at Duke and you spend a decade at Duke and you end up running the research for their cancer center. You took on some pretty audacious goals there, I think. You both set them for yourself and took the opportunity to make some pretty big changes. Talk about those.
Yeah, so it's a very innovative organization. I think you know that from your time there. I think they're always willing to support people trying things pragmatically and thoughtfully, and even if it doesn't succeed, learning from it. So I think I was always very thankful for that support and that leadership that I had there. But we continue to want to do things faster. And I think that's the key thing, especially in disease areas such as cancer, because, clinical trials really are the only options for care and for hope. And so one of the areas that I helped light a fire under was really how long it took to open a study, which has so many gates and milestones and things you have to do, and uber coordination across a very big, organization that has bureaucracy levels. And so I think, we worked really diligently to get our timeline down, and we actually split it in half in the time that I was there so that we could actually speed. We went from around 187 days to under 90 days by the time that I left, that we could open a study. And for an organization as big as that is, it's quite an accomplishment. And I felt very proud about that because I think it took so many, hands to make that happen.
Sure.
Certainly not just mine, but for me, like, I just want to do things for good, like to do good for others and to solve problems so they don't happen again for good, and making sure that our team understood what their roles were in that, and I think they executed a lot of things very, very well while I was there.
All right, there's two different directions I want to go with this, but let's start at first with the team piece and kind of what it was that you had to put together to make happen in order for this to go from 187 down to 87 days, right? I mean, that's a huge change. That's going to save lives. You know this. So, but at the same time, you've got to coordinate the effort and you've got to be able to probably convince people to make this happen. How did you manage the coordination of all of that as well as the various teams that would be involved?
Yeah. So obviously I had to actually build the team, which I think a lot of leaders have this experience. And I think you have pieces and parts that work really well, or maybe pieces or parts that they're actually not even doing the things that they're good at. And so I think what was important for me to do was really understand where there were missing puzzle pieces potentially in the team.
Sure.
And it was, this is from an administrative perspective, it's financial, it's operational, it's clinical, it's regulatory, it's data, it's IT, like it's the whole kit and caboodle when you think about something, which I love because that means it's complex.
Sure.
And so it was a very complex build in the sense of making sure that we had the right skill sets, which included recruiting the right people, as well as looking at the processes within each, what I call gates of, let's just say, opening a study. There were things that were in each one of those gates that we need to look at from a process perspective, and then see what we could question, and then also understand how we measured it getting better. Or, is this something that this is, I'm not someone that usually accepts this is just the way it is, or this is how we've always done it. Those are two statements I really cannot stand to hear in any organization. But
I totally agree, Leigh. I totally agree. Yes.
It's like, well, we're going to get what we always get, So from that perspective, I think building the team was one of the biggest pieces. And then I think advocating and educating was the other side of that. So here's why we need to do it. Here's why we need to change. Here's the support resource or information we need to do this. And so building that picture and that story so that once I had the team and, you're flying it while you're building it, in a lot of roles. And I think that was the case for us because it wasn't like things stopped. And then there were areas that we needed to, to come in from a SWOT perspective, potentially, and even just, clean up and make sure we were doing things the way that we should always be doing at the highest levels of quality.
Sure. So what was a time in the midst of all of that maybe you started to doubt whether it could be done, or maybe it was really tough?
Yeah, I was young, so not that I'm old now, but I mean, I think I would have handled certain things differently in my younger self, from that perspective. But I think I was always like pushing, and I think really always advocating at the highest levels with a high intensity. And you wear yourself out doing that. So I think that's what I would tell myself now is like, you could have chilled every now and then. But it was like, I felt an intensity around people's lives and sense of urgency. And, some of my losses I've had in my own life kind of lead to me having that little bit of an edge around it. But I think every now and then I'd be like, man, am I doing the right thing? I think sometimes I would have to, make sure we were playing by the rules and we were doing the right thing. And that would not always be received as a good intentioned effort. It was like, you're being administrative, or, I remember one time just a PI saying, are you helping me? Are you innovating and helping me move forward? Or are you just an administrator that's going to make sure that X, Y, or Z is happening? And I'm like, I'm both. And on any day, like you could be 91 and 10 the other, or 50-50. Like it wasn't like it was, you could, look at that as a end all be all black and white situation. So I think sometimes that got difficult. And I think some of it was just my own learning and figuring out how to solve conflict when you're going through some of the change management processes that we had to go through.
Yeah. Well, tell me about one of the times you went home and you just felt burned out and you didn't know if you could keep going.
Remember that? Yeah, I'll remember that. Yeah, I think, from the perspective of high quality being at the top level, I mean, it's a pretty, intense role, no matter where you are in academia. But I think, in particular, wanting to just always be ahead and innovate and be at the highest levels, it takes its toll from a perspective of time management and those types of things. I think the one that came to mind immediately when you said it is we had prepared, and we were so prepared, and I was so excited. We had done everything we needed to do. We had a huge grant renewal coming in, and we were going to knock it out of the park, and we did. But we were coming back from a not so good score. We were going to a new score, which, we were going to get, but we didn't know what we were going to get. Lots of preparation, just really doing everything to the nines. And after the day that they came in and they evaluated us and it was all done, I remember just going in my closet, sitting down and crying, because I was just like, so much, we'd done so much, had so much intensity. It's a high stress type of moment, like presentations, people coming in, looking at everything you've done for the last 5 years. It's an incredible process, but it is intense. And I think I just went home from that not knowing what it was going to be. And I remember my supervisor saying, "That was great. It was awesome." And I was like, "It was?" And I was just like, I didn't think it, for me, I was picking apart things versus I think looking at the totality of the great things that happened. And I think that's somewhat of our human nature. But again, that's another thing I'd change probably I'm 50. So I think, now I would look at it differently, but that's the time I remember.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's important to let people know that in the midst of grit, in the midst of like pushing through, in the midst of audacious goals, there are times where we go to the closet and cry, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's really important to acknowledge that and let people know that, so that when they do go to the closet and cry, they know they're not alone and that it's not over.
Closet, so it was a large closet.
Even a large closet. I don't know big and small closets. I get it. Oh my gosh, that is that's it's a hard road, but an important one. And you've mentioned a couple of things actually as you're telling this story, and I'm going to maybe back up into the one that's more historical first. But you had some losses in your lives that really affected who it is that you became. It sounds like.
Yeah, and I think as I got older, I think I realized how much they formed me or formed my actions. And I think as when I was younger, I think I knew they were there, but I don't think I realized the unpacking of my story so much and how it actually, impacted how I really responded to certain situations. Or like, for example, when I give that intense time, we got to get stuff done, people's lives are on the line. So when I was 6, my older brother died. He was playing and fell, and it was just a tragic accident, and he was 11. And I never, it's hard when you're 6 to really even understand what's going on. Right. But seeing that process and seeing my parents go through what they went through, even at 6, and then as you get older, like you notice more and more. But my mom, I mean, I don't know if I could have done what she did, which was let us live our lives after that. Like, I'd be like, everybody on the couch, we're all going to hold hands. No one's going anywhere. I'm not going to work. I don't know what it would be. I can't even hardly think about it, honestly. But she really did let us live our lives and let me play soccer. And like, we had these rules, like when you get taken out, because I did a lot, because I just didn't give up, and I would get laid out by some, third grade boy or whatever, as I had to like raise my hand as I'm like on the field so my mom didn't run on, and those types of things. And she would let me go on trips and things like that, but I didn't know she was following the bus. And so like, I didn't know till I got older that she was like letting us be, but also like still healing herself. And so I think I felt responsible, just to make sure like everyone was okay, and like she was okay, and my older brother was okay. And so I think that was a big thing for me. And I also realized like life is not guaranteed. Yes. And at 6, I lost my 11-year-old brother. And I think, for me, that was the first loss. And I think it was just one that was, again, just a reminder that life is short and that people don't always understand your story as you go through life. My second big loss was I dated the same guy 8th grade through sophomore year in college, and we were apart, and he went to a party and he fell down the stairs, and he ended up dying from, actually just hitting his head so hard. And so from the particulars of that, like I was 22 when that happened. So like 6 and 22, those were biggies. And obviously he was my best friend and I had grown up with him and, you know, we had a relationship, but I mean, it was another like big loss and a reminder, like life is short.
Yes.
And then my last one, thank goodness, was an almost. And when I was 39, my husband now went into the hospital. He got misdiagnosed and he ended up having necrotizing pancreatitis, which I don't know if you know what that is, but your pancreas like runs your body. So don't mess with it. And basically he had none left. And because it had basically just all the acids had taken it out. And so he spent the next 4 months on a feeding tube, almost passed away in the first 2 days. And we're still recovering from that one, but it's been a while. But I think those three things like are just like marked moments in my life. Some of those actually happened while I was at Duke. Right. So, you know, from that perspective, they're just things that I think that has created my intensity for like life is short, be bold, like get out there, do it, because you don't know. Like it's not guaranteed tomorrow. So I think that's some of the history of my intensity about living your life.
Yeah, that is, I mean, every one of those, one in isolation.
Is enough, right?
Right? Yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
but you know, as you are talking about this intensity and this focus and the things that you were able to accomplish, it sounds to me like you, in understanding that life is short, you have really honed in on things that matter to you and things that matter in terms of contribution. Can you speak a little bit to how purpose played into that for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think as I got older, I got better at putting it in the right direction, you know, versus like I just have to solve everything and you know, once I was told by a coach, I have the mantle of responsibility. I mean, I think I'm responsible for everything.
Yes.
And all of us can probably, a lot of, you know, females can probably feel that sometimes. I think just like it's not, everything isn't our responsibility, but I think I was carrying a lot of that. So I think as I worked through different moves and different careers was like what is and what isn't my responsibility. And I think especially since I started my own company, I'm a heck of a lot better at that. And being able to delegate and those types of things. But I think, you know, from a perspective of purpose, where I tried to hone that was really about how can I help speed efficiencies or how processes or connections from my you know, my learnings, which is highly administrative and operational. But you know, operations is something I am very, very excited to be working in because it has complexity, it has depth and breadth, and some of the things are like a low-hanging fruit type of moment where some others are, you know, much higher complexity. And so I enjoy that puzzle. And I think that's where I was able to take kind of some of my, how do I make sure we don't waste time no matter what it is? And I ended up in healthcare, which I absolutely love, but I think it can happen in lots of businesses that help others. And that's just really where I landed. And so like, I like an agile mindset. I like a growth mindset. You know, we're going to learn and we're going to try things and they're not all going to work and we're going to be okay. You know, we're just going to breathe and we're going to know what to do next. So I think you can have a great plan, but it doesn't always go that way.
No, well, that is not a common thing in any field, I'll just say, because I work with people across industries when I work with clients, and I think there's a desire for that, but it's hard for people. So how do you think, and I'm right there with you with all of that, the necessity of like continuous improvement. How do we get better? How do we make things better? How have you cultivated that, or what do you attribute that to?
So I think I've cultivated because I don't have a lot of patience. It's definitely not my middle name. And I don't have patience for things that could be better to make other people's lives better. So like whether it be, you know, we get 1,000 reports that tell us that women in the workforce aren't doing well. And we have these wonderful companies that create these great reports and we still haven't moved the needle. And like right now I'm, you know, trying to what I call be an innovative agitator is like we need transparent standardized metrics across that we can see standardly. But I mean, that's just one example right now of something that I'm a little hot about. But I think, you know, from the perspective of working in a healthcare system, I think there's so many things that add up to making a difference in someone's lives. I mean, when we came to Dartmouth, and that's where I am now in New England, you know, one of the opportunities there was to build and to grow and to reset certain areas of their research organization, which was, you know, blooming into this beautiful organization. And I think one of the things that I'm very, very proud of like all the work that we did added up to us being able to open studies very quickly during the pandemic. And one of our studies opened in March of 2020, which we all know that was the very beginning. And we were able to bring participants in and have them come in where we're still figuring out what in the world is going on. And every participant that came into that study went home alive. And I'm so proud of that. So like, I think, from the perspective of like, oh, you're just an administrator and what do you do? And I don't think you were saying that, but I think some people like, oh, well, I'm just in finance or I'm just in this, but you're actually connected to something that's making a difference, because the people that worked on the budget, the people that worked in the literal clinical area, the people like me who are helping connect the teams, all of that was connected to those people going home. And so I think I love that about the role and those types of things, that it helps me feel like I have a purpose and also like I'm making a difference in the work that I do. And that's so important.
Yeah. I mean, you're making that connection to purpose again and again and again, it sounds like, which is important for doing that kind of work.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you don't have that, then I think I would be definitely lost. I think, from the perspective of just having a job that's never been my mental, like how I go into a role. It's like, how do I help? How do I learn? How do I grow? How do I mentor? Like, it's just, you have so many roles, regardless of your title, like when you come into a job like that. And I think just figuring them out and then prioritizing is the key thing to do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. In the Grit Factor, we talk about a grit triad, which is that essentially grit is not this discrete element of character, but rather tied to the whole person. And there is a commit phase, which is about owning your story. It's drilling down and connecting to core purpose. The middle phase is the learn phase, which is really deep engagement in the present. And the piece that I want to talk to you about is mindset there. There's a couple of other components as well. And then the last piece is launching, which is audacity and authenticity and adaptability. But it sounds like, as we've talked about, story and purpose, these are elements that, whether or not you define them or think about them, that you have really done a concrete job of owning that story, of taking that story and saying, hey, these are things that could hold me back, but instead I'm going to use those to catapult me into this purpose that really allows me to move forward. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Absolutely. And it's scary sometimes, because you're like, I haven't shared those three things in a row with anyone, except maybe a close friend. And I know we just met and I hope we become close friends. Yes. But from that perspective, like, to put it out there, it's like, oh, gulp moment. But it helps people connect. It helps people understand. It helps people go, oh, that happened to me too. Or, oh, maybe that's why. Or maybe that's why she's so intense at times, Sure. So I think,
I need those excuses too, Leigh.
Like I just can't wear a patch with that on my arm and walk around and go, this all happened to me, so this is why this is so important to me. And so I'm also, for the majority of my life, been extremely private. And so like, I wouldn't tell that to most people. So I think I have to also realize that my story, one, is my story. It's unique. And it's important. Two, it could help others.
Yes.
Or it could help others understand who I am and who I want to be and how I'm still evolving myself. And so that's why I think it's so important to share those types of things now.
And Leigh, the other thing is, I think there is a tendency for some people to say, oh gosh, these things happened, I can't possibly get past this, right? And to hear the stories of people who have had real incredible challenges and tragedies, and been able to say, okay, I have an opportunity here to either let this take me down, or I'm going to use this to push myself and propel myself into a life that's meaningful, right? That contributes what I'm meant to contribute in the world, that helps others in the way that only and uniquely you can do. That's the opportunity that we each have, right? And it's important to hear your story for people who are really feeling crushed maybe by things that have happened in their lives.
Yeah. And then also, I think helping others, heal. A big part of this, all three of those moments, there's healing still happening in all of them. And so, and I'm sure anyone who's had a loss of any degree can understand that. And, I think I always look at it like it's, your healing is like a little scab, and every now and then it'll get knocked off, but it'll heal back up, but it's always there. And I think, as we learn more about ourselves and about our story and how it impacts us or how we can help others, I think it just becomes a way for us to, I think we're here for a reason. It's to help other people. Like, someone said, what do you do? I'm like, well, I help people. And they're like, can you be more specific? And I'm like, well, I help people, They're like, stop saying help. And I'm like, well, really, that's what I'm here for. So, I mean, it's interesting just, I think, as, for me, as I got older and I was able to think more about why my reactions were my reactions, or why I was so, maybe I should let some things go, or, be okay to cry at this moment versus that moment, because being tough for so long, I think, as we talked about, like that closet moment, I think it was just that moment. It was like, okay, I can't hold it in anymore. And for me, like, it was so important to realize that that's a really natural thing to like be able to let it out. And for others also to know that healing is not like you're done, it's a lifelong process. And I think that's really something I think that's been very powerful for me to understand and also to share with others.
Yes. My first book is North of Hope, and I don't normally talk about it with my clients, but it is a
I got it. I got them both.
You got them both. That's right. Well, so like I think that kind of a loss and that you and I and many others actually have experienced in different ways, right? They're all different. Yeah. They're all unique. And I remember, and it's the well-meaning things, right? When somebody says, are you over it? Have you healed? Did that bring closure? And I was like, wow, this person must not know, because
they don't get it, right?
There's no such thing as any of that, right? It becomes part of who you are, and you have to decide how it is that you can use it for good. And it's
like no one's journey is the same. My trigger was always when someone would say, I know exactly how you feel. And I'd be like, no, you don't. And like that became like a huge trigger for me. Like, and they were just trying to be kind, but like it would really like push me over like the edge. Like I can't even talk to that person anymore because they don't know, and you could go through like the visuals of each one of the things that you've gone through. And I think so I always try to say, I can only imagine. Exactly. So like for me, when I talk to people, because I think, it's so important that no one really knows, like when you say, walk in another, they always say man's shoes, but walk in another woman's shoes, like it's not the same, just you thinking that, you don't know until it actually happens. And I don't wish any of that on anyone, but I think, from the particulars of just people don't realize what they say sometimes, and like, you're never over it. And it's always going to hurt a little. I think it's just kind of getting through it and knowing like you open your eyes the next day. It's like, okay, I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to get out here. I'm supposed to do good. And I'm here for a purpose. And so I think that's how I was always like, just it is ingrained in me since I was 6. And I saw how my parents responded and what they did and how they were able to heal and, continued to move forward, left, right. And I think that's just been from the very early on, first grade, kind of where I've come from.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That is
sure, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not they're not easy things to live through, and they're not easy things to share, right?
Yeah,
they are important, and I do love how I think you and I have this in common, where you connect the difficulty of that to a purpose that then is energizing. And you're like, we are all, each of us, here for a reason, to contribute something unique that only you can contribute, right? So you went into Dartmouth. Tell us a little bit about and you're using the same kind of incredible work that you did down at Duke up in Dartmouth now to be able to get people through studies successfully and alive. What was that process?
Yeah, so different culture, different organization, obviously smaller, but still mighty in the sense of the work that they do and across the entire state of New Hampshire. And I remember someone saying, well, the whole state of New Hampshire could fit in the town of Raleigh. And I was like, okay, but enough, it's very important work. And obviously what we're doing has a meaning. And I think that's the one thing I knew the moment that I hit the ground, that the work had meaning. And that was so important. It was intense work. It was a build of the research organization and adding things that they didn't have before for the new research they were going to be doing, and then building teams together to be able to go to the next level and be able to do different types of things that they hadn't done before. So I think that, that was a shorter period of time in my career, but I think by then I had been running really, really hard for almost 15 years straight. And it definitely had taken its toll. And we, of course, had my last couple months in that role was the really front end of the pandemic, which there's lots of frontline folks who certainly felt the impacts of that and still are. as an administrator, just normal 16 to 17-hour days was normal from the time that it started till when I left. And I think at that time, so at that time when I decided to leave, I was definitely burnt out. I don't think I said those words, but I was a nub is what I like to say.
Yeah.
And I had to rebuild me first before I could actually get back into the work. But that's when same time I resigned, I also submitted my papers for my S Corp, which has 4 different businesses in it. And, but I did take time to just I had to reset because I wasn't in a good space mentally, physically. Like I had let everything that was outside of work go. And I think I needed that time just to rebuild me, which I'm thankful I had that time.
And Leigh, I think there are a lot of people who will relate to your description there in just not being able to take care of themselves in the midst of all of the things that they're required to take care of, whether it's their job or their family, especially in the midst of the pandemic and even coming out of it. How did you give yourself that? And now at the same time, you're planning ahead, clearly, so we'll get to that in a moment. But how did you give yourself that space and what was that like? Because this is something we all need to do right now.
Yeah, I first had to go through, I think, the feelings of I'm a failure. Like, I am such a tough person. Like, I didn't, even though I was burnt out and, would have moments of just like, we can do it. And then the next day I'd be like, no, I can't do this anymore. Next day, oh, it's going to be fine. And I was kind of like on this schizophrenia of like, I got to make it work because I don't give up. Yeah. I'm not a quitter. No one uses those words with me or anything like that. But in my mind, I'm like, I've got to tough this out. We're going to make it. Too many people depend on me, my team, the organization, my family, so like, but it got to a point where I couldn't do it. And I first had to go through, I failed. And that was probably another crying moment where the moment I did it, the moment I resigned, I sat in my car in my driveway and just cried before I came in the house because it was just like, it's happening. I'm doing it, and I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing next, but I knew I couldn't do what I was doing. And so there was it was interesting because I think it was a very quick flip of like, it's going to be okay. Right. And it wasn't like weeks of like, oh my gosh, and all that. It was like, okay, like you now can do anything you want to do and you've never had that opportunity before. So what are you going to do? And that's where I think, for me, it was just like getting pointed in the right direction. But I knew I couldn't just jump into anything because of where I was and being very stressed. I think, not being physically fit, which I'm still working on recovering from. And just, I gained 50 pounds when I came up here, just from how I got into very bad habits of not eating, just working, just drinking coffee all day and then having a lot of spaghetti at night and then going to bed, like,
no, I know.
My favorite things are lasagna and cake. So I think, from those perspectives, that all you eat, you will not be healthy. So I think, from that perspective, I just needed to regain some control, I guess, of my own, like, just capacity. So I did a lot of running and walking and getting outside. And in New Hampshire, obviously, it was fall and I'd never seen, the trees turn and those type of things. So I was always working. So got to do some of that, which I think was it was refilling my soul a bit and like, okay, like, what am I good at? What do I like to do? What do I find joy in? And that's where I was like, okay, and if you look at our 4 businesses, is where I find joy. And so I think that's kind of the piece and the part that kind of put me in that direction. But I had to, like, I won't say rock bottom, but it was low. It was a low moment of like me feeling good about me, my life, my role, my profession, and all I'd worked hard to do. For sure.
Well, that's not a small thing to go from 16 or 17-hour days in a very high stress profession at a very high stress time, even with the reset into like, hey, now I'm going to run my own business. Because as all of us know who run our own businesses, it's it's not a low stress proposition.
That's free. It's a different kind of stress though, right? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. You get to be in control. That's a good thing. But it's not a small thing.
Mm-mm. No, and I think someone asked me, like, did you plan that all your life? And I'm like, and I sat back when I asked that question, I was like, I think I'd been like preparing for it my entire life, sure. But I hadn't planned it, because I don't think you plan to like get so burnt out that you can't function and can't think and you're so stressed and you don't sleep. I mean, I was sleeping max 4 hours a night, max.
Wow.
So like it got to that point just, from just the particulars of the stress, and especially during the pandemic and trying to do everything fast and make sure we were available and making sure we were, had studies and like we were doing everything the right way. Like it is intense. And so I think for me, like you don't like plan for that, but I think I was all my life going, if I could, if I was in charge, like here's what I would create. And like it just was amazing kind of how it opened up, like me being able to be creative and to think thoughtfully and to think how I could utilize my skill sets. But I also knew me enough that I knew I couldn't just jump straight into something without really just honestly rebuilding me a bit, because I'd let it go, like, and I needed to think about how to be mentally okay, how to be, less stress, and stress was an important piece for me to kind of bring down. But being a business owner certainly has its stresses, but it is different. They're there, and I think I got better, I think, as I got into the role, and I really kicked it off in January of 21. So I took from September of 20 to kind of build, think, and go through what would be my offerings and how I would work with people, talk to people, get my own coach, because I needed someone to unpack some of the stuff that was between my ears, not just help me, build a business, but also like, how do I, what's in there, So I think, talking about the shadows and things like that, like I had never really dug into that because that's hard work.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had time for it, and I think the other thing I did was relaunch my academic career and get back at it with something that's been a goal of my entire life, and my mom's goal, of course, for all of her daughters to have doctorates. So I'm the only one now that doesn't have one. So my
but
two
you
little
have 3 master's degrees.
I know, but that doesn't count. My mom's work.
Doesn't count.
I'm just on the way to a doctorate degree. So I think, from that perspective, I think it was nice to be able to focus on that and to learn and to, again, be around different people thinking differently, which is always the fun part about school for me.
Absolutely. Oh, no, that's fantastic. So I don't know how much you want to share about the journey of your business, but you have been wildly successful in just the first, what is it, a year and a half that it's been going?
Yeah, year and a half. So from the perspective of how I kicked it off, I think I never thought I was an entrepreneur, but I realized I think I always was my entire life. That's why I was always pushing the envelope or asking to change things or not wanting to follow the rules. I mean, that was in healthcare, you follow the rules, but I mean, like, do we really have to get that approval? Like, this is really what we need to do. But obviously, I was always pushing on things, but with good intention, not to break a rule, but like we could go better, faster, and if we just didn't have to do certain things. But I think that was a little bit entrepreneurial for sure. And now that I was in my own role, being able to have lots of ideas and be creative, and also realized all my ideas aren't good ones. They could just be ideas.
Sure.
Yeah, I launched it with a list of 15 people I knew, and I just started talking to people, started talking about, my products that, I started with the healthcare consulting, business consulting. Really, the ideas come into organizations and work D90, D60, and D30, and those are days. So like, what do you want to accomplish in 90 days, 60 days, and 30 days? And then we get at it, and then we course correct every day if we need to, and we measure and we talk about it, and we try things that maybe you've never tried before, and that's new for some organizations. And so I was able to I had a runway for myself, and being able to get my first client by the end of May of 21, and then I've consistently had 6 to 10 clients since then. And then this year we've launched our second business, and then we have 2 more that will be coming along. So trying to be thoughtful about that, not launch them all. But when you talk to people, people think you're crazy. Usually when you're starting off doing something like this, or how could you leave corporate? And, and it wasn't my mom asking me that's who I was a little worried about. I was like, is she going to be okay? I don't have like a 401k yet. And I don't have she might think I don't have benefits, which I do, you just get them on your own. But I think, from that particular piece, like, I think there's stability, but I think sometimes we pay a cost for that. Like, we pay the price for that. And meaning, like, when you try some things, I'm not saying everyone should quit their job, because that's not easy to do. But I think you could think about what's next, or how would you go to the next place that you could find more joy or more alignment. I think balance is elusive, so I really don't like to use that word. But like alignment with kind of your world you want to be in, that's one thing you could just ask is, do you feel joy and do you feel aligned with your purpose?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes and yes, then you're in the right spot. But I definitely wasn't.
I had my old boss at Microsoft actually said that you should write and refresh your resume every year and look around. And he said
Yeah,
and then decide, do you want to stay here? Great. Then you've made that decision. You're not just
yeah.
staying because you're staying. You've actually made that very specific decision. And I think that's a great recommendation for all of us.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was something I always wanted my staff to do is that when we would do, I would say lots of organizations are still doing the annual review as a way to review people. And, but I would say, make sure your resume is, updated, make sure that you're understanding kind of, your role and are you happy? And are you doing things that, you find joy in that you feel you're good at? Because I think sometimes we get placed in places or spaces because that's the degree we have, or that's how we were raised or how we were taught. And, now I'm much more of like, you should try everything, like try it, and see what you learn about yourself. You may be good at it. You may not be so good at it. And I think that's some of the stuff I got to do in that time period before I kicked off the consulting piece of the business was to really try some things and go, nope, I'm not good at that, or I don't really understand that. I'll just let experts do that, So I think it's exploring some of those things. It doesn't always mean doing something big and like quitting, or it could just be like, I need to really think, am I in alignment and am I happy? And I go back to like, life's too short to be unhappy.
Yes.
And so I think, just being mindful of that, time is limited regardless of how old you are. To think about that because it's so important.
I couldn't agree more. Well, so this bottom phase, commit, and which is about story and purpose, you've got nailed. The second piece about deep engagement in the present, the piece I wanted to ask you about was mindset, because you have a mindset that doing hard things makes you better at doing hard things. And you have the mindset that, yes, this is going to work and I'm going to find a way to make it work. So how do you think that mindset came about for you, and or how do you continue to cultivate it?
Yeah. So again, I probably go back to just being pretty tiny and seeing some significant pieces and hard work that, my parents had to go through. And probably around that. And if they could do that, then like I can do anything. And I was also raised by my parents to like, no matter what you want to be, you're going to be it. I remember my mom told me I didn't apply myself enough. I was going to apply to Duke. And she's like, you haven't applied yourself enough to actually go to Duke. And I still remember that like comment, like, oh, how dare she say that? But it was true. I really didn't apply myself. I did well in high school, but I didn't have to try very hard. But like if I tried, wow, I could have probably been like valedictorian and all this other wonderful stuff. But I was really good with, mostly A's and a B here and a C once in math. So I think I was good with that. But I think, from the perspective of like, it becomes, I think, more joyful for me to work hard on the things that make the most difference.
Yes.
And I think, that's where I think as I've gotten older that it's just been more of a focus and a tenacity that I have, and grit is a great word for it. It's not always easy when you're in that gritty zone, and I think it's just pushing through it sometimes to be able to get through that where you might want to give up, because it happens. Like when I was planning my business, I think there was a point where I was still plan B. I was like, this is plan A, this is plan B, and it was like, you can't plan B it if you're really all in for A. And that was like, I had to do that in February of 21. I was like, because I was still in the back of my mind, like the financial mindset and all of those types of things that come into play. I was like, I can't fail that way for my family. But it was like, if I didn't give it all in on A and go for it, it was just going to distract. And so I think that's where also, I think as a growth mindset, you have to think, are there things I'm doing that are actually distracting me from what I want to do because I'm plan Bing it, right? Like I'm a planner, so like I always want to have a backup, but sometimes you just have to go, and go for it. I think that's where like, I talk a lot about being bold, but bold has a continuum.
Yes.
It's not just taking a leap. I mean, there's bold that's extremely vulnerable. Yes. And like, some of the things like I shared today, like that feels very vulnerable for me. And it's not easy to do, like you said. So I think that's like one end of the continuum. The other continuum is like you and I talked about this, like facing the wind, like just Absolutely. Like when the helicopter rises, like you're facing the wind and I'm going to get up and this is how I have to do it. And I think that's where I think people may not realize they have bold notches across that continuum of things they've gone through and things that they've done. And I think that's very important for people to realize that too. It's not always some big, bold move of like jumping off something or jumping from one thing to the other. There's moments of bold in everyone's life, and they just may not know it.
Right. And that's going back to looking at your story, right? And really being on that story. That's fabulous. Well, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your story and your journey. I mean, it really is inspiring to know how it is that you have looked at challenges and taken on challenges. And I will say, whatever you did or didn't do in high school, we learned these lessons along the way, right? And you clearly have more than learned it at this point.
Thanks for listening to The Grit Factor. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend. Also, pick up your own copy of The Grit Factor for more candid stories and lessons from leaders in the vanguards of their fields. And invest in yourself and in your team with learning journeys in grit, leadership, purpose, and storytelling at thegritinstitute.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll join me for the next episode of The Grit Factor.